Psychological stories can be fascinating. It's an opportunity to explore characters' psyches, allowing for deeper understanding and empathy for them. However, the human mind is a complex thing and is associated with many abstract concepts such as memory and emotion, which are inherently challenging to write. And a particularly challenging subtopic is neurodivergence, fundamental shifts to how the mind normally operates, which includes stuff like mental disorders. It's yet another layer of complexity and abstraction, so how do you begin to communicate what that's like to an audience who potentially has never experienced such a thing? Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk and its sequel Milk Outside a Bag of Milk Outside a Bag of Milk, developed by Nikita is a series of visual novels that manages to capture exactly this. It's primarily concerned with expressing what it's like to live as a neurodivergent protagonist rather than telling a conventionally structured story. And its effectiveness comes from strong character writing, from the creative and digestible representation of the protagonist's thoughts, and the conveyance of intense and nuanced emotion. The Milk series is an incredibly brief but visceral encapsulation of those experiences, and as a result is able to garner empathy and understanding from the audience despite the challenging subject matter. Before you watch any further though, there will be minor to moderate spoilers. It's hard to avoid spoilers since the series is only like an hour and a half long, and given what I've just said, it's better to play this for yourself anyway. The protagonist of the Milk games is an unnamed girl who's not doing too well. She suffers from unspecified mental illnesses with some pretty severe symptoms, including delusions, a warped perception of neurosis, phobia, hallucinations, general instability. She's medicated, but it's not helping enough, and it cripples her to the point where she can't do basic things like buy milk from the store. That's where you come in. You play as a voice inside the girl's head, a figment of her mind that she turns to for help. In the first game, you help the girl go to the store and buy milk, and in the second, she's made it home and you help calm her racing thoughts and get to sleep. The plot is minimal, but as mentioned, it's not the focus. It's more of a vehicle to explore the protagonist. And the choice and perspective creates a great framework for this. Firstly, you share the same perspective as the protagonist even though you play as a peripheral character. You still see the world through her eyes and read her thoughts and so on. Secondly, the player character, the voice in her head, represents a part of the girl. The interaction between these two characters is a reflection of the inner conflict between these two sides of her, only it's externalized for the audience to see. Lastly, it establishes a relationship between the player and protagonist. Not only do you interact with her directly through conversation, she's also somewhat reliant on you. It's personal and engaging, and there's almost a responsibility on the player to help this character. Anyway, the Milk series does a great job of characterizing the protagonist in its short span of time. There's no formal introduction to her character or her past, instead that's naturally revealed over the course of the series. This is mostly done through dialogue, where the girl openly speaks her mind, or sections where she narrates. It's quite introspective and insightful. The way that she reacts to different situations, the peculiar way she rationalizes things, how she recalls formative memories, how she talks about her troubled family relationships, and her surprisingly cheerful attitude in spite of it all. It's all indicative of who she is as a person. For a more detailed example, one conversation is about the girl's half-empty sketchbook, where she explains it should last another couple of years. She purposely draws so infrequently because finishing the book would mean needing a new one, which means getting on a bus to go buy it, which is a nightmarish scenario. The player can also suggest to ask her mother to buy it for her, but she vigorously avoids that subject. A breeze suddenly flips the book open, causing the girl to shut her eyes in fear for some time. This mundane scenario is actually really incisive. It shows the girl having creative interests, but is afraid to look at her own creations because it reminds her of the past, which she has an aversion to. It reaffirms her inability to be in social situations. It demonstrates how her mental state has constricted her lifestyle and how she's become avoidant in facing it. And despite their troubled relationship, it suggests the girl's mother might not be as bad as she thinks, and perhaps she knows this deep down. The Milk series is full of insightive conversations like this that provide a window into the girl's mind. Fragments of information build up her character, while implied details give a sense that there's more to this character than we can see. As a result, the main character feels like a unique and nuanced person. It's solid writing that's both concise and thoughtfully planned, teaching the audience a great deal about the protagonist and her psyche. While the writing is commendable, it's still difficult to capture the more abstract psychological concepts in writing alone. To really understand what that headspace is like requires more than just direct explanation. The Milk series utilizes various aspects of the visual novel medium to represent those ideas in more accessible ways. The games typically provide multiple dialogue options, but sometimes you're left with a single option to insult and belittle the girl. Because you play as part of the girl's mind, this can be seen as her struggling with self-deprecating thoughts. The player's lack of choices communicates the girl's lack of control. She can't help but think these things. Other times she gets caught in circular arguments or thought loops, and the act of having to physically click through the same repeating dialogue over and over emphasizes just how stuck she is. The Milk series also makes great use of visuals to convey how the girl sees the world. One notable example is the color palette. At a young age, the girl was scarred by a grievous incident which caused her to become partially blind. She can now only see in reds, which is why the graphics are colored like that. It's an overt representation of the girl's trauma, something that continues to deeply affect her many years later. The ubiquity of the game's graphics serves as a constant, unignorable reminder of the profound effect of that incident. The game effectively transforms an abstract concept into something tangible, giving it a physical form that can be clearly seen. In general, these games have a lot of strong imagery and symbolism, both visual and otherwise. Like how the girl's memories are represented as fireflies, the big symbol in her sweater, the vague entity you play as and what that represents, and of course the recurring appearance of milk. It's an evocative way of conveying information. It can be kind of vague and harder to interpret, but it's undeniable that it elicits more of a response from the player than a straightforward explanation would. Even if you don't understand the girl's explanation of conversations and the pyramidal structure of verbal constructs, that description immediately conjures images in your mind and associates those ideas together, giving a subconscious idea of what that means. The full weight of these thoughts often elude straightforward descriptions, and so these alternate forms of communication provide a more visceral depiction of them. It allows the audience to understand the girl's thoughts on a more instinctive level and to better empathize with her. And when paired with the solid character writing, it gives the player a more well-rounded understanding of her. But there's one other important aspect needed for a holistic understanding of the protagonist, and that is emotion. The Milk series makes full use of its audio and visuals to create a palpable atmosphere that expresses the emotion of the main character. From the minute you start the series, you're hit with a pervading sense of unease. Eerie music drones in the background as the text scroll rattles on. The high contrast, lo-fi graphics is a mash of harsh textures and ominous images. Milk 2 also features distorted fisheye shots and undulating backgrounds. It all builds up that unsettling tone typical of horror games, keeping the player on edge, anticipating, dreading what's to come. It's the default tone for most of the series and captures the anxiety of the girl. Her distorted reality is violent and hostile towards her. Her past is full of traumatic memories that continue to haunt her, and things rarely seem to go her way. She's learnt to be cynical and fearful of everything, to never let her guard down even for a second, and that feeling of fear is conveyed through the looming atmosphere. Of course, there's a big difference between anticipating something terrifying and actually experiencing it. The immense blaring guitars, flashes of a monstrous creature, and horrid descriptions creates an overwhelming and terrifying sensation. For brief moments in these visual novels, the audience is subject to the full force of the nightmarish visions that plague the girl, heavily leaning into its horror aesthetic to carry the intensity of those emotions. On the other end of the spectrum, we get calmer, almost peaceful moments. Inside the cluttered room of the protagonist, the visuals are far more subdued, consisting of mostly flat blacks and dark purple outlines. The music is also calmer, it's soft and tinged with melancholy. There's a dichotomy between the calmness inside the girl's room and the harshness of the outside world, which can still be seen through the window. It's probably the one place the protagonist actually feels safe, and although it's kinda sad that she's confined here, there's a certain coziness about it. The Milk games take full advantage of the visual novel medium, using the graphics and audio to create atmosphere and convey the emotional state of the protagonist. It's simple but effective, allowing the audience to share a wide range of emotions with the main character and ultimately facilitate empathy for her. The Milk series is an extremely effective character study of a deeply disturbed neurodivergent character. And it's not because of any one thing, but a combination of solid characterization, expressive depiction of thought, and conveyance of emotion which forms a holistic exploration of the protagonist. It manages to overcome the challenges of treading complex and abstract subject matter, enabling the audience to really empathize with its characters, which is critical for stories like this. The Milk series may be a brief experience, but it's an incredibly vivid and profound glimpse into the mind of another.